Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I am Dan from Seahorse Source. I've been doing seahorses since 2003 was when I first started. Back then, I didn't know anything. I didn't even know how to cycle a tank in 2003 when I first started. My sister worked in aquaculture, gave me a hand in getting going. My wife and I spent 2 very long years of doing some intense research and study, experimentation, what have you, and then in 2005 we started Seahorse Source. Over the years, as you can see, we've had many different species. When we first started, we started off with the Erectus, the Reedi, and the Zostray. And we've worked with each one of these species to some degree, some more so than others. Mostly what I'm going to talk about this time is the basics in terms of raising fry. Last time I was here, we went over how we did it, but I'm going to keep this real simple. When you want to raise seahorses, obviously it all starts with the rootstock, and your first choice, of course, is going to be whether you get wild caught or whether you get captive bred. As a commercial breeder, I prefer wild caught, which is getting tougher these days because it's with CITES getting into effect, it's just harder to source them, and it's also very difficult to get them in a good condition unless you personally collect them. If I can't get wild caught, then I usually try to find a source that has a good breeding program that's close to F1s as possible. At the hobby level, if you're looking to start breeding at home, unless you're going to do it commercially, I would highly recommend going with captive bred specimens. Just find a good breeder that will give you good specimens. It's much easier. It's a whole lot less work to get going with them. The rootstock, they need adequate space to start breeding. It was interesting when I was doing some research on my Facebook page. We talked about vertical space for seahorses. And back in the 90s, it was recommended to have 1.5 times the height of the seahorse for their tank. And somewhere throughout the years, it's grown to where now there's people that recommend 30, 36-inch tanks, and it just, at the rate they're going, in a couple of years, they're making 6-foot-tall tanks. What I find is horizontal space is just as critical, if not more critical, in terms of breeding. A good example is that the abdominalis that we currently have in a round tub. It's a 90-gallon tub, TP90 from Aquatico, and the tub itself is 18 inches tall, max with water. Where we have our water level is about 16.5 to 17 inches, and we can't stop those guys from producing. We've tried separating them, and the juveniles keep turning, they're too young to sex, and next thing you know, we got juveniles that are having babies. They just breed like crazy. And I find, as a breeder, that I have better luck if I've got a lot of horizontal space, and I don't have to worry about vertical space at all. Most of my tanks are somewhere in the 18 to 24-inch high range. Stocking density will come into play with your broodstock. With young seahorses, it's not so critical. Young seahorses will, they're going to find a way to do it no matter what. You put a bunch of them in a tank, you got a bunch of them pregnant. Older seahorses, which I prefer to use as broodstock because of their size, an older seahorse will typically be much more mature, a larger pouch, and typically they'll have larger, more sturdy fry. And the majority of my broodstock is 5 years or older. Those are the ones I like to use. The problem with them is that when you put, regardless of the tank size, the more you have in the tank, it seems to cut back. There seems to be, it's almost like competition. And if I can take, for example, a 150-gallon tank and put, say, 6 to 8 pairs in there, I only have 1 or 2 pairs to produce. If I take those and split them out and put a pair per 30 gallons, almost all of them produce. So we've gone back to using smaller tanks for broodstock, either a pair in a 30-gallon or 2 pairs in a 55. when it comes to getting fry from rootstock, your diet will have a huge impact on the quality of the fry. There's an interesting thesis I read from Marshall Chang back in 2000 where he did his thesis on comparing frozen food versus lightomyces versus lightomyces fed with enriched Artemia. And the lightomyces obviously did better than the frozen foods in terms of the fry quality, but the enriched myces with the enriched Artemia did much better. The fry were larger, they were more durable, and the ultimate survival rates were much, much higher. The key is giving your rootstock a diet high in humus. The other thing is that with rootstock, a lot of people become breeders by accident. They don't realize they buy a pair of seahorses, and if you put a pair of seahorses in a tank, you may as well be, putting a pair of teenagers in the back of a 57 Chevy to drive them without supervision. So they end up with fry. And unfortunately, most tanks are not designed to collect the fry, so it's difficult. If you want to intentionally breed, I recommend setting up a tank so that you can collect the fry. Obviously, you have to prepare for fry. It seems like every week I get a phone call, I get an email, I get a text message, and it's, my seahorses have babies, what do I do? My standard answer is start studying for the next batch. Because if you're not already set up, your odds of having any success is going to be extremely difficult. And there's tons of people that are on Facebook and message boards and whatnot that got a lot of pictures and talk about breeding and they're quote unquote breeders. My recommendation is to find the people that have seahorses to sell or give them away, because those are the people that are being successful. Just because they're posting a lot of pictures and show fry setups doesn't mean that they're successful. And seahorses are not an easy species to raise, and it pays to find somebody who is successful at anybody. If you're not already, most of the group here is a little bit different than your average people, but you want to make sure that you're very familiar with your live feeds. The two most critical things with seahorses is going to be how you manage your feed and your water quality. And then you need to think through how you want to proceed, whether you want to go with a static or recirculating system and what size tank. When it comes to tank selection, there's basically three types that we see with people using for fry tanks. There's the round versus rectangular, and then there's the Chrysler, which I'll cover in a moment. I have a great preference for round tanks. If you're looking at commercial aquaculture, that's pretty much what you'll see. There's a reason for it. You get a nice flow, gentle, even flow pattern in a round tank, which leads to it being cleaner. You don't have the turbulence that you get with a glass tank. The fry don't have to expend as much energy swimming around in the turbulence. They can just almost drift around in a round tank and feed, and that leads to faster growth. And then also with a round tank, you can have much higher stocking densities than you can with a rectangular tank. And then you also have to consider the volume and your stocking density. And this is where I see a lot of people make huge mistakes because they try to use too small of a tank. There's multiple studies out there that cover what the ideal stocking densities are for fry. And for example, H. erectus, if you go through the studies, you'll find that most people recommend around 2 to 3 fry per liter. And if you do the math on that, you take 250 fry, 2 per liter, that's 125 liters, or roughly a 33-gallon tank. And some of the seahorses, like our erectus rootstock, will have somewhere between 400 to 600 fry per batch. And then, of course, you also need to consider how many tanks you're willing to use to do this. When we first started, the very first batch of erectus that we raised, we started in a 15-gallon tank. In a week, we had to split them up into 2 15-gallon tanks. And then 2 weeks after that, we split them up into 2 30-gallon tanks. And I don't remember the exact time frame, but it was somewhere shortly after that, we ended up with four 30-gallon tanks. And we also, during that time frame, had more batches coming. So what we've ultimately done is, instead of using glass tanks, we've gone to very large, I say very large, they're over 90 gallons, but it's the 90-gallon round tubs that will start from day one with the fry, and they stay in there until they reach cellar size. And we can pack a whole bunch in there. We don't have as many tanks, but we have higher production level as a result. There's a lot of folks that use Chrysler tanks, and the whole concept of the picture there, the top one's actually a true Chrysler tank, and down below is a picture of what similar to what you'll see in the hobby. The whole purpose of a Chrysler tank supposedly is to keep the fry off the surface, which to me really doesn't make a lot of sense, because the fry program to go up to the surface to become a plankton layer. And in my mind, nature programs animals to do certain things, but it doesn't usually program them to commit suicide. And what people believe is, or a large amount of people believe, is they develop a gas bubble from sneaking air. And the other problem that you can sometimes have is the fry is simply too weak, where they get trapped on the surface tension or on the meniscus where the water meets the wall. And all of these are preventable, and a Chrysler tank is entirely unnecessary. The problem that I have with most of this type that I see, besides being too small in volume, is there's not good flow through them, and the water quality really goes bad very quickly. The gas bubble is not from sniffing the air. It was funny because when it first started, my sister had some kudos, and she was explaining to me about the air bubble thing, and told me that people thought it was from sniffing air. Well, I took a look at what was going on, and I thought I was a genius. So I went and got some screening. I covered the tank in such a way that the screen was a couple inches below the surface. We put the pregnant male underneath. He had the babies. We started feeding him rotifers. And boy, I was struck by stuff. I figured this out. I couldn't believe that all these people hadn't figured out how to do this. It was so simple. Well, 2 days later, my bubble got popped because all the fry was stuck to the bottom of the screen with bubbles, and they had not gone to the surface. So clearly we knew it was from something else. And at that time, I suspected it was bacterial in nature. And it wasn't until around 2005 that I got some confirmation from that from Wolfgang Mai, who described it as being bacterial enteritis that causes it. The weak fry is easy to fix if you condition the rootstock. The fry will be stronger, and of course the tank setup. You'll find that if you have flow, like in a circular tank, just going round and round, and it's big enough, you'll see the fry will stay suspended in the water. There we go. And they don't get stuck on the sides. What a lot of people do is put air lines in the tank that are bubbling up, and the air lines will push the water towards the side. Push the water towards the side of the tank, and the fry will get caught on the meniscus. If you'll notice here in this video, the top you can see we make no effort whatsoever of keeping the fry from the surface at all. And that's regardless of the species, whether it's reed eye or Pluto or what have you. And in case you're wondering, this thing over here is an area during the feeding time, we have the flow turned way down, and this simply gives us more circulation to keep that gentle turn inside the tank. When I said static and recirculating, by static I simply mean that we take a tank and there's no filtration. People rely on water changes. I'm surprised at how many people do that. The only time that we do it is as a temporary holding measure. If we have unexpected fry and don't have a system ready, we'll put them in a tank temporarily until we can have it ready. If you go with the static system, you're doing daily water changes, you go through a lot of water, and it's a lot more labor intensive. With recirculating systems, there's less water usage. Ultimately, there should be less labor. It's a much more stable environment, and when you set up this type of a system, you have to design it in such a way that you don't lose the fry. And So it's easier to create a system with a sump where you can put micron screening in than it is to use a hang on the back filter. I would encourage that if you decide, you want to do the fry. And of course, it needs to be cycled ahead of time. When you design the system, you want a constant gentle flow, but what happens is during the feeding time, we want to keep the food in the tank, and this is problematic because we want to have good flow to have good turnover, filter the water, but at the same time, we don't want to flush out all the food. So during feeding times, we go low rate, and then we go with as high a rate as we can go comfortably, depending upon the species and the size of the fry after feeding, so that we flush out the food. Typically, Artemia and rotifers, you don't want to leave those in for any period of time with the nutrition value will drop. We used to control the flow rates with ball valves, and we're slowly converting over to all variable DC pumps, and we're finding those work awesome. The electrical usage for all of our pumps is dropping drastically as a result, because all we're doing is turning it down and it just has less pull. As I said, you need a way of removing the uneaten food, and the easiest way to collect that is with a filter sock. We find that 100 micron is proved to be our most optimal size. We tried going with 50 micron, and the problem was that we were changing it twice a day. With a 100 micron sock, we would go 24 hours. And we're using a 4-inch sock that's 18 inches. And you want a really good mechanical filtration scheme for seahorses. And one of the things that really people don't really get with seahorses, they always say they look different, but internally they're much different as well. And some time ago, I came across this paper, which was quite interesting, and I was looking for something else. I did not bookmark the page, so I haven't been able to find it since. But what this paper said was that when seahorses sniff food, they have a fixed jaw, they slurp in the food, it gets macerated, and they swallow it. Well, in the process, if you watch it, it looks like smoke blowing out of the back of their head. And that smoke is actually food particles. And according to this article, about 8% of what they eat actually gets blown right back out. And then they talk about the digestive system not having a true stomach, and as a result, they have a fast transit time. Typically, what we observe is within 10 hours after they eat, they're starting to excrete the stuff. And some of that does not get digested. According to this paper, about 23% of that doesn't get digested. So as a result, assuming that the paper was correct, 1/3 of the food that you're feeding a seahorse is not going to eat, it's ending up back in the water. So that's a lot of organics going into a tank. And some of our fry systems, as those juveniles start growing and they start getting up around 2.5, 3 inches, they start to really dump the food in. And if you've got 400 or 500 seahorses in there, you can put as much as a 1/4 pound of food in a tank in a day. And that's a lot of organic matter. And if you're not removing it, bad things are going to happen. Things are going to grow that you don't want. So you need some type of good mechanical filtration to remove that. And obviously, if you're putting that much food, you're going to need some really good biological media. The picture here, this system, we put together in a hurry. We had an unexpected arrival that we had to put the system together. So we took the stuff that we had laying around to make it, but the design is very much what we normally do. And we have a DC pump down here, which pumps up, goes to a 5 micron canister filter, and those we change out every day. And from there, it goes over, it splits, part of the water goes to the tank, which is up above, and then the rest of the water goes down to this right here, which is a 3-gallon Purple filled with K1 tallness medium. We use it as our own homemade bioreactor. And then our filter sock is right here. And then, of course, we have a protein skimmer. And if anybody's paying attention to this, it did get turned. The intake did not stay up against the glass for very long. Our I'm really big on protein skimmers. This picture here, that's from 24 hours every day we clean the protein skimmers, and I snapped this shot because it was indicative of what we see, especially once we're dumping in the frozen food. 24 hours of skimmate from one tank. When you're raising fry, you're going to have two types of fry to deal with. One's pelagic, one's benthic. And benthic is probably not the correct term, but I'm going to use it because everybody else does. Pelagic fry are going to be much smaller. They're going to require much smaller foods. They don't hitch at first. They'll spend the first few days to up to a couple of weeks basically just swimming around feeding. And with pelagic fry, we generally leave the lights on 24/7 while they're doing that for faster growth. They're much more fragile and difficult to rear. And benthic fry, if you're going to start breeding and haven't bred seahorses, I would recommend starting with a benthic species, and then if you get good with them, then take on the challenge with the pelagic. You're going to find there's very few people that are really good that have much success with pelagic fry. The advantage to the benthic fry is, of course, first of all, is they will take Artemia, enriched Artemia from day one. At nighttime they hitch, we can turn up the flows. They're stronger and larger, and they're much easier. On the species that are currently available in the U.S. market, there's every now and then you'll see some other species, but for the most part, this is what you're going to see. And your Erectus are probably the most common species that are sold in the U.S., and it's what most people start with in terms of breeding. The Barbary are probably just as easy as the Erectus, however, they don't produce as often, and they have much smaller batches. In my eyes, the Abdominalis are the easiest. Unfortunately, they're not an easy sell because they require chiller and much cooler temperatures. And those who are interested in dwarf seahorses, the H. zostrae, to me, it's like having a perpetual fry tank because their needs are basically the same as fry. So we have a brood stock, we figured everything out, now we get a batch of fry. Once we have the fry, we have to move them. Put them in a fry tank. And the easiest way to do that is to move the male to the fry tank and have him delivered there. And you don't end up losing the fry in filtration, so if your tank is not set up before having fry, it's probably the smartest way to do it. And it also prevents the parents or tank mates from eating the fry. One of the things that we see quite often in several of our tanks is that the females will go after the fry. Father gives birth, and then it's just like we dumped a bunch of brine in there, and the females are up there just sniffing away, picking them off. The first time that happened to us, it was my sister and I were building a system. We had a batch of Pluto fry, and we didn't have the system ready, so we very quickly went and built the system. It took us about 2 hours. We had it up and running. We had cycled media already on hand, so it really wasn't a big deal. We got it all done, went back to the tank to get the fry. There was no fry. And so we checked the filter sock, we checked the filters, we looked around the sump, we looked everywhere, we couldn't find it. 2 weeks later, we had another batch of fry, and we sat there and watched. Sure enough, we had 2 pairs in the tank, and both females were up there just picking them off as fast as they could. And they were having between 500 to 600 fry at a time. And within an hour, they're wiped out. What our systems are designed so that we don't lose the fry to filtration. We have screening and setups in such a way that most of the fry will go to the surface, and we have our drains down towards the bottom, and with screens on them, so we're able to collect the fry very easily. The easiest way to do it is with a siphon hose. You know, you can use a turkey baster. I don't like using turkey basters because typically most of them have small tips, and when people squeeze them and try to suck them in, you can cause mechanical injury to the fry, trauma as you suck them up. If I was to use a turkey baster, I'd make sure it has a very wide opening. Some people like to use a cup. My wife and I both used to use the siphon method. My daughter, on the other hand, likes to go around and use a little Dixie cup and just slowly collect each and every one. Just much faster with the siphoning. And on occasions, I've had the need where I've actually used a brine net and just very gently collect it. And again, sneaking air is not a problem. Lifting the fry out of the water is not a problem either. For feeding seahorses, you know, I've read a couple of places where they mentioned that a seahorse fry can eat up to 3,000 food items per day. And if you think about it, that's a lot of eating. The food needs to be small enough for them to consume, but at the same time, you want it as large as they can comfortably consume. You know, the larger the mass and the more nutrition you provide, the less energy is spent, so the faster they grow. For pelagic fry, we're usually, or I'm going to say we start off with rotifers or copepods. With benthic fry, you can use copepods, but you need larger copepods, ideally. Most benthic fry can easily take enriched Artemia, so if they can take enriched Artemia, they can take copepods up in the 500 to 600 micron range. And then we also use live mycetes. Every time we have a batch of fry, we'll inoculate a tank with live mycetes, and they will reproduce in the tank, so they get monopolized as another food source, and mycetes will also act as a cleanup crew. And it's kind of cool because the mycete population will grow as the seahorses grow to a point. So the population expands, and then all of a sudden, you'll start noticing it'll start contracting. And when it's contracting, now they're going after the live mycete. It's time to start dumping in the frozen mycetes. Rotifers. The advantage of rotifers is they propagate very quickly. Unfortunately, they don't have any real significant nutritional value on their own, so they have to be enriched. And depending upon who does the enrichment, what enrichments are used, what techniques, the results can vary greatly. And rotifer cultures are notorious for bacteria and ciliates. And from our experience, our best success rate in the years that we've been doing this using rotifers has been 50%. We're at the point now where we have used rotifers now probably close to 10 years. We've stopped using them entirely. Copepods, on the other hand, have great nutritional value. Will significantly improve your survival rates if you can have enough. But if you remember, 3,000 food items per day, if you've got 500 seahorses, that's a lot of copepods. They are much slower to propagate, and I promise you, with seahorse fry, you'll never ever have enough copepods unless you've got 15,000 gallon copepod tank. We live on the coast, so what we use instead of rotifers, and instead of trying to raise copepods, we collect live zooplankton. And the nice thing about that is we have unlimited amounts. We have a wide variety of organisms. I've had sampling done. I've done some from Adelaide Roads, and I've had a couple of other companies that have taken samples and then report back what they find. And we'll have different things in different times of the year. This time of year, there's a lot of barnacle larvae, which the seahorses seem to do very well with. And one of the great things about collecting zooplankton this way is that we can sort it with different size sieves and get the size that we want for the species that we're dealing with and as they grow. So if I want something in the 50 to 125 or 150 to 225 range, I can just collect that. Or as they get bigger, I can sort it out and go bigger in size as I want. There goes. This is a 15 ml sample from 3 gallons of one of my collections, and that 3 gallons was a one-day feeding for a tank to give you an idea of how much we go through. And the advantage of that is the light's on 24/7 feeding zooplankton. this picture here is a 2 redi. The little guy over here is a newborn, and this one over here was born 2 weeks prior. It's a 2-week-old redi from the same root stock. And if you look at it, he's got a very nice filled out shape where they grow really fast when you give them enough food. Anybody that does seahorses, you're going to have to learn to do Artemia. They spend a long time on Artemia nuclei. Artemia is used a lot because of its availability. It used to be inexpensive, but I guess it is relatively, but to me, the price keeps going up and up and up. It's just the way the market is. It's not a natural food source, and it does not, as a consequence, it doesn't have the proper nutritional value unless you manipulate it. The fortunate thing is that it can be manipulated. Artemia is naturally low in the DHA component of the fatty acids, and Artemia also catabolize DHA back down to EPA rapidly. So for enrichment, you want something that's very high DHA to EPA ratio. One thing that most people don't consider when they're doing their foods, the Artemia that I find, and which causes a lot of people not to have success, is that Artemia can be a source of bacteria that enter into the larval tanks. And with Seahorse Fry, not having a true stomach, one of the other things is they don't have gut associated lymphoid tissue. So they have a very strange immune system, and if you can keep your Artemia clean, you'll find that the success rates will go up drastically. Most of our species of seahorses will end up roughly for 6 weeks on their Artemia. So it's critical to get it cleaned up. The picture here, the two nuclei, the little one is newly hatched, and the second one is 24-hour enriched Artemia nuclei. I took this out of the FAO manual on live feeds, and it shows you, newly hatched versus 12-hour enriched versus 24-hour enriched, and there's a huge difference in the nutritional profile. And we only use 24 to 36-hour enriched Artemia. If they can't take that, then we go to live Zooplankton. We do not use any newly hatched at all. And I spoke before about the mysids being active as a cleanup crew. They'll eat the same foods as the Seahorse Fry, so they'll feed on the Artemia just like the Zooplankton, just like the Seahorse Fry will. Their nuclei is an extra food source, and then of course as they get bigger, they'll start tearing into them. And then there's always the last 1 or 2 strays that are running helter-skelter through the tank trying to dodge 400 or 500 seahorses. We do use adult Artemia. We don't produce it ourselves, we buy it. It's cheaper to buy it than it is for us to produce it. And we use it as a transitional food. As soon as the fry get big enough, we'll start feeding it to them because it has a larger mass to it, which results in faster growth and gets them used to eating larger foods. But once again, just like with the Artemia nuclei, it needs to be enriched because it too does not have the correct nutritional profile. As I said before, the key is two of the main keys for success with keeping seahorses, or raising seahorses, I should say, is that you have to you have to have good quality clean food and good water quality. And reducing bacterial loads in live foods will be one of the most major keys to having success with raising seahorses. I don't care how good the water quality is, if your if your food is loaded with bacteria, it's just not going to work with seahorses, I promise. You want to make sure that all your equipment is kept clean. We go through a pretty stringent process in the way that we do things with our, especially with our Artemia. You want to make sure that your vessels are in good condition. I found it very interesting one day when I started using peroxide. I was cleaning some of my, both my hatching and enriching vessels. We use dishwashing detergent with a non-abrasive scrub pad now. Then we follow that up with 12% peroxide to scrub it afterwards to cut any soap residue. And besides a little bit of sterilization, it tells me if it's clean or not. The first time I did that, when I wiped it down with the peroxide, the whole thing just started foaming up. And I said, wait a minute, I just scrubbed this. So I went back, I scrubbed it again, I wiped it up again with peroxide, I had the same thing. So then I took some phosphoric acid, I cleaned it, it was nice and clean. And next time I cleaned them, I had the same problem. So I got to look at real closely. We had been using the green 3M scrub pads, and even the glass vessels had all these fine scratches on them. So we replaced all the vessels with new stuff, made sure that we used equipment that did not scratch them up, and noticed an immediate improvement. Probiotics will help a lot with reducing bacteria in the live feeds, and there are different techniques for sterilizing the different feeds. Rotifers, same thing, keeping your equipment clean. You can restart your cultures, help keep some of the ciliates and bacteria counts down, and probiotics will, again, make a difference. And you can sterilize rotifers with peroxide. Since we don't use rotifers anymore, we don't actually do this process, but you can sterilize using peroxide at 40 milligrams a liter for 15 minutes, and that's supposed to reduce about 90% of the bacteria. We don't culture copepods, but it comes down to the same thing. You want to keep your equipment clean. You want to restart your culture periodically, and if you use probiotics, that should help keep them down. I find it interesting that the wild zooplankton that we collect, the only thing that we do with this is before I go, I take probiotics and I'll start the probiotics in our buckets for about 2 hours before we go, collect the plankton, and then when I get back, I rinse it and I feed it.
What probiotics do you use?
I'll show you in a moment. Artemia, that's our little hatching station, if you will. Once again, got to keep the equipment clean. Tip I got from Colby, which helped tremendously, was to use the probiotics during the hatching process. So when we go to hatch our team starter hatch, we put the cyst in, we add the probiotics, we let it hatch. Post-hatch, we then sterilize with peroxide at 8,000 milligrams per liter for 5 minutes. And then we do the enrichment, and again, we add probiotics. The first time that I did the sterilization with the peroxide, it was interesting because it looked almost like somebody had poured a beer at the top of the cone. I had about 1.5 inches of foam. And today, when we do our sterilization, there's no foam whatsoever at the top, and that's a result of us. That's what led me to the idea of we needed to clean our vessels better. And it has made a huge difference. The black thing, the black hoodie on one of the things, that's when I separated the Artemia, instead of using a light to separate, I had my wife make a black cover, and I just slide the cover on, let it sit and settle, and that's just a quick, easy way of doing that. Eventually, you have to transition between foods, and it's critical that you overlap the foods. A lot of people make the mistake of switching too rapidly. For example, when we're on zooplankton, we feed for 10 days typically, zooplankton only, and around the 10th, 11th, 12th, somewhere in there, depending upon their size, we'll start adding Artemia in small quantities. And what we'll do is over 3 or 4 days, we'll gradually shift and increase one food, decrease the other food, and in some cases, we'll extend that period to 5 to 7 days, depending upon the food, the variety, and conditions. Same thing when you're going to frozen foods. You want to keep giving live foods for a period of time before you just make the complete change. Give the digestive system a chance to adapt. You'll find some will transition faster than others, and as I said, slowly taper down on the food. Some people will use frozen copepods of cyclopeas with smaller fry, or shaper myces. We don't. We feed live foods entirely until they start eating the live myces, and then we just go to straight whole mice and shrimp. And we use Hikari, and we go straight to it. We have no problems at all. I wish I had a picture of that. I wasn't able to find the picture that I wanted, but your mice and shrimp should be rinsed before you feed it. We do between 1 to 2 pounds at a time, and when we rinse it, if you were to look at the water that's coming off of it, it's just loaded with organic matter. And rinsing that food will reduce the organic loading in your tank. Another neat trick that we do with our mice is, because we're doing so much at a time, is that once we rinse it, we put a little bit of water, and we'll add about a quarter to a half teaspoon of ascorbic acid per pound, and not for the benefit of the fish, but as a preservative to keep it from turning while it's in the fridge. And if we don't use it within 24 hours, we toss it and start a new batch. You want to keep your frozen foods off the bottom of the tank. We train our seahorses to literally feed right out of the water column, and if they don't eat all the food, it goes to the bottom, they get siphoned up. If they allow the food to sit on the bottom for any period of time, it'll slowly become colonized with bacteria, and you'll find that some species of seahorses, once they start, people have great success until they start getting frozen foods, and then a couple weeks after, anywhere from a week to 2 weeks after starting frozen foods, they start losing them. And a lot of what we found was, if we keep the feed off the bottom, we don't start losing them at that point in time. As far as the question on the probiotics, we use Sanolife from Envy. Envy makes 2 different Sanolife. In fact, I think they just came out with a 3rd product. Mike F is one of the products. Mike F is specifically for fish. They used to have a product called Mike S, which was for shrimp. They basically the same product, the difference is in concentration. One is 5 times more denser than the other. But you'll find that probiotics will improve the digestive activity, the growth performance, it enhances the immunity, and it helps fight off the pathogens through competitive exclusion. And I can't recommend probiotics enough. It's made a huge difference for us in our learning process. There are some problems that you can have when you're raising seahorses, scratching. Quite often I see people posting, scratching their heads, and they say they're dropping, and there's nothing wrong with them, they just drop dead. I don't understand it. Tail rot, slow growth. Some people have difficulty converting to frozen foods, and as already mentioned in the previous thing, hydroids, and then there's the old too much fry. That happens. Scratching. This little clip here is, for those of you who haven't had seahorse fry before, is a perfect example when you hear people talk about them scratching, where they take their tail tip and flick at their heads. And when you see that, the first thing you want to do is double check your parameters, make sure your ammonia, nitrates, pH, all that stuff is good. You need to reduce your organic loading in the system in some fashion. And what we know, our standard go-to treatment is formalin at 25 parts per million long-term immersion, where we dose it every other day for 3 times. If necessary, we'll dose it longer. Seahorse fry, even newborn, Benthic Fry, even newborns will handle formalin from day 1 with no problem. Don't do that with the pelagic fry until they're about 2 weeks old. We'll hold off on doing that. They don't seem to handle it quite as well. You can also do bass, but I like having a system designed where I can treat the water, and to me it doesn't make any sense to do a bath and then put them back on the water where everything was to begin with. The most common cause that I see with scratching is from ciliates. There are some other causes that can happen, such as flukes and what have you. Praziquantel and metrodiazole can sometimes be used. And the other thing is you should double check your system for hydroids. The hydroids will sometimes cause them to flick it, usually not necessarily just their head, but flick at their body and try to get rid of the stinging action. The dropping for no apparent reason, well, there is a reason. When I see them drop and I can find nothing wrong with them, my first suspicion is bacterial enteritis. And that means we need to clean up our food. Keep it frozen, we need to keep it off the bottom. And if you're not using probiotics will help you with this particular issue. If we're having a lot of drop off, we'll double up on the probiotics. And then make sure that you're not running your temperatures too high. For those who haven't done seahorses, you'll find that if you keep your temperatures in the lower 70s, they're going to do better than in the upper 70s or 80. Tail rot is a fairly common problem that we see in the hobby. As a breeder, our standard protocol, when we see a white tip like this, if you look at the very tip of the tail where it's turned white, our standard protocol is to pull that particular horse immediately and euthanize him. We don't play around with them. We want to stop it. We have too many things to deal with, and if you don't catch this quickly, it'll spread very fast, and the next thing you know, you're going to lose the whole batch. It is treatable, and we've had great success in treating it. The problem is that if you treat it, they're still going to, or most commonly, they're going to lose that tip of the tail anyway. As a commercial breeder, they're no longer sellable. So for us, it just makes the most sense just to put them down. Common causes for this is bacterial, urinema, and stress. And if you attack the underlying issue and use probiotics, you'll find this issue will normally go away without any other, without having to get antibiotics. When we start if we see white tips, the first thing we do after we pull the affected specimens is we'll scrub every surface of the tank that we can, the some, and then do as large of a water change as possible, typically around 80 to 90%. We'll temporarily double up on the probiotics, and we'll make sure our temperature's in the range that we want. And I would say probably 90-95% of the time, if we see one or two this way, we attack it that way, the problem goes away, and that's it. If you don't do that, then very quickly you'll start seeing a large percentage of them develop. I'm not a big fan of using antibiotics. I try not to. I think antibiotics are greatly overused, but it will work in this particular instance if you have a specimen that you do want to save. And I find the easiest way to do it is to gut load adult Artemia with the antibiotics and feed that to them. That way you don't have to set up a separate system and you don't kill the biological filter, and the oral route is much more effective than a bath route anyway. Slow growth there's actually two types of slow growth. One is normal, and that's where within each batch of fry, you'll have the majority of fry that will be a certain size. Then you'll have some that are fast growers, and then you'll have some that are slow growers. I don't get too shook up with that. Every so often, I'll see people that will post pictures of raising fry where they'll have, they say, this is my seahorse, and it's a 4 or 5 month old seahorse that's 2 inches in size, and that's too slow growth. And there's multiple reasons that can happen. Most commonly, it's the seahorses simply aren't getting enough nutrition, either because they haven't been converted off the Artemia, and they're not getting enough big enough food item, or people just aren't using the right enrichments and the right foods to begin with. Generally speaking, most species, like Recus, reedi, kudos, we expect about 1 inch per month of growth. A couple of the other species, such as the Barbary, are much slower. They're about twice as long to grow. The tiger tails, the H combs, is pretty much the same way. They're very much slower. Converting to frozen foods is very easy. When I first started, it was not very easy. My first pair of erectus I collected myself. They were 2-inch juveniles. We raised them, and they became our first pair of broodstock. And the first several batches of fry that I got from all the way up to adults, I was feeding them live foods the entire time. I could not get them converted over to frozen food. And my sister came to give us a hand, and in 2 days she had me eating frozen food. And I just sat there and scratched my head and go, how the heck did she do that? And I watched her do with other seahorses and found that it's a matter of patience, persistence, and really confidence. And we could get wild-caught seahorses come in. Wild-caught breed are notoriously difficult to convert to frozen foods. When we get those, and we don't even bother having live foods on hand, we have that much confidence that we'll get them eating frozen foods. When the fry, if you're patient and persistent, and instead of offering the regular foods to start with, if you start off giving them small amounts of frozen food, kind of tease them a little bit, target the food at them, you'll find that while they're hungry, they'll get interested, they'll start. And seahorses have this habit of playing follow the leader, and pretty soon they'll have the whole batch taken off eating the live food, the frozen foods. But if you're having an issue with it, you need to keep trying it, keep offering, and slowly dial back on the amount of live food that you're feeding, and keep them hungry so that they will eat. You don't want to starve them, but you want to keep them hungry so they will eat. Hydroids, I find, is, there's been a lot of debate that I don't know what the correct answer is on whether or not brine shrimp eggs actually can be the source of hydroids. I think that more commonly it's a false contamination issue. You can have hydroids in a display tank where the broodstock are and not see them in there because there's no food source, so they're pretty much dormant in there. But as soon as you start take some of that water, put it in a system, and put a bunch of zooplankton in there, they go crazy. And if the fry system is set up properly, where it's just a fry and you don't have other things in there, you can use bendazole or panicure, which is usually very, very effective. Safeguard makes a product, we call it no dewormer. It's a 10% solution, and that's what we normally use. In fact, with zooplankton, I have to prophylactically treat every system, from the get-go with that. Seahorses tolerate different bendazole, even at high doses, very, very well. Most of the time, it takes very, very little, 1 to 2 milligrams per gallon to give you an idea with the 10% solution. That's 0.1 mLs to 0.2 mLs per 10 gallons. There are a type of hydroids that you can run into that developed on us on the tails of the seahorses, and we noticed it on the hitches. And it looked like fuzz. I mean, it almost looked like hair algae growing on. And I was trying to figure out what it was. And Adel John Hogan visited us one day, and I showed it to him, and one look said, oh, those are colonial hydroids. So we hit him with panicure, and nothing happened. And what we found was it took that particular type of hydroid, we had to go 4 to 5 times higher in dose to knock them off. If you use panicure, it will overdraft the skimmer. And in a fry system, you shouldn't have the other things in there, but if you have any herbivores, omnivores, or corals, you can read it. And then there's the too many batches of fry. The easiest way to, or the most sensible way to deal with this to me is to separate the males and females. You can also, there's a lot of people that are looking for fry that don't necessarily want to go to, buying their own seahorses and keeping the broodstock. There's people out there that will adopt them. And that's another way to do it. If you're going to ship them, I put this picture up. When I wanted to get started with combs, I couldn't find them, but I found somebody in Washington that was having fry on a regular basis. So what I did is I had to put 50 juveniles in a 2-liter bottle, and had her send me 100 juveniles overnight, and we successfully raised the batch. The key is to put them in a container with no airspace, so they don't get sloshed around. And they actually ship very, very well that way. There are some other ways of dealing with it. A lot of people are not very fond of. It all depends upon your own ethics, but you know, as a commercial breeder, if we don't have too many fry, then we're probably not going to have enough seahorses to sell somewhere down the line. Some people will use them as feeders for their other tanks. Some will just flush them. Some will euthanize. Some will let the filters take them. You know, each person has their own correct answer for that. I saw a thing on Facebook that said Rules of a Scientist, and I changed the title here to Rules of a Marine Breeder. And I just thought that this was very appropriate for NDI as a group, because it seems for everything that the group stands for. And number two, I've always said that when I get to the point where I stop learning, then I'm going to move on to something else. And each day to me is a learning day dealing with seahorses. It's just a whole lot of stuff to learn. Questions?
We were talking about using the peroxide.
Yep.
What percentage peroxide? Is that standard or?
No, I'm buying 35% peroxide. There is a couple of companies that sell it for aquaculture. Some people will buy food grade. I have a local chemical supply company that sells industrial grade, and it's very cheap. It's about $8 a gallon. And they use them on wells for correcting problems with bacteria and iron in wells. So if you can't find it locally, check with your water company, or the companies that do wells. Sometimes they'll give you a source of where to find it.
I can find it. I was just curious for the dilutions.
Yeah, what I do is I use 35%, and if I need to, like for example, on my Artemia counter, I have a jar that sits there. It's actually a big cup, measuring cup, 2-quart measuring cup, and I make a 12% solution by adding 2/3 RO water to it. And I keep a scrub pad in there, and then I have my soap scrub pad. And then I dip my nets in it. I clean my hoses. You know, we use it constantly. And anytime I need a different percentage solution, I just make it up by the 35%.
Cool. Thank you.
How long are you enriching your Artemia?
Typically 24 to 36 hours.
You're enriching the whole time?
If I'm going to go for 36 hours, I'll usually do the first enrichment with something like spirulina that's lower in fatty acids, because too much fatty acids, it'll clog them up. And you know, I like using algae back 3050 as my primary ingredient in my enrichment. And if you go more than 24 hours with that, you'll stop, they'll clog up and die off. But I like to grow them out a little bit. You know, I like to get them beyond, as big as I can get them to feed out that's practical for faster growth.
Your system setup, you have the 5-micron filter in line on the return pump?
Yes.
Is that a cartridge that you can spray down, or?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I get it from Watts. It's in that particular size filter, the largest I could give is a 3/4 fittings to go in and out. So it looks like an RO filter almost, except it's 3/4 fittings coming in. And those are standard 10-inch filters. And what we do is we rinse them, and we have we call them our sterilization barrels. We have 3 muck buckets, and the first muck bucket is what we call the dirty muck bucket. And they just, as we pull them, we toss them in there. And usually every 12 to 24 hours, we'll go out and take a high pressure spray hose, and we just spray them down, move them to the next one, which is what we call the clean bleach bucket. And by that point, they've gone from brown to where they look almost clean. And then from there, we move them over to a bucket with just fresh water, and we'll put about a cup of 35% peroxide in there. and let them sit in there and coordinate.
What's the preference in switching from live feed to frozen feeds with why the preference?
Well, frozen food is much more economical and easy.
Okay.
And when you go into, if you're raising seahorses, the market's going to demand seahorses that eat frozen foods. You know, certain places, the cost of getting live food shipped to other parts of the country is very expensive. And it's a massive amount of work to raise enough live food to feed them.
So it's mostly about economics?
Yeah.
Okay.
Reality, live food's going to be better for them, but
I was thinking quality must be in there somewhere.
depends on where you get the food. I mean, you know, I got friends that live along the coast, and you know, they go out their back door and you know, collect live foods, and that's all they feed their seahorses. That's great.
Okay.
The tougher fellow in Nebraska to do the same thing.
That's true.
You know.
All right.
I have a comment and a question based on that. I'm a nurse,
Yep.
and given any natural environment, let's take us humans, for example, we have natural bacteria that's on our skin,
Correct.
and it's healthy for us.
Correct.
You start using antibacterial soap, you get rid of that natural bacteria. You're taking chances of getting pathogens. I'm thinking that seahorses have, you're saying that they have a more difficult immune system, but given in their natural environment, they would have some sort of natural bacteria
Correct.
that keeps them healthy. This is where my question is. Would there be, with biofloc, it is a heterobacteria that is in the system. If the heterobacteria was taking up the majority of, as being a good bacteria, it's highly nutritious and say being able to have copepods or amphipods in the system, maybe a percentage of that water going back into your breeding stock as extra feed that they can pick on. What would be your thought on that?
Well, the problem is that in a typical fry system, the organics build up.
Not necessarily the fry, but the adults. Because they would have a basic immune system, kind of. That
Well,
is,
to a point. I mean, if the system is running properly, you know, bacteria is usually not one of my concerns. You
Okay.
know, fry systems are different because they have the organic load. With the broodstock tanks, unless you're overstocking them, if it's properly set up and properly filtered, you shouldn't be having a big. It's not usually not a big deal. Most of the time, when I'm dealing with customers that call into the help desk, it's because they've had, you know, temperatures that have spiked, or they've had some type of stressful event, or they're overstocked, or, you know, there's something going on.
What would you think a biofloc would be useful?
What do you mean by biofloc?
Biofloc. It's, from what I understand, normally a tank that is used for collecting the waste and the food to where the bacteria can
I wouldn't, no.
retain the, okay.
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't. The problem is that your microflora can shift. You know, all tanks have good and bad bacteria, just like you were talking about, we all have bacteria. But the numbers usually stay within normal ranges until something happens, some type of event. And a lot of, you know, Vibrio, I think, is heterotrophic as well. I mean, as soon as they get a chance, as soon as that gene gets turned on for that pathogen, they take off. And it's, you know, once they do, for most people, the time they realize that it's over.
What are you using for strainers on your larval tanks?
I don't know I don't think I had a picture of that on there. I'm using, I have a 1-inch standpipe in the center of the tank, and then I take a 2-inch PVC pipe, and on the end of the pipe, I take a straight connector, and I cut out the bottom, and then I glue, depending upon the size of the fry, screening around it. For my Pelagic fry, I use 670 micron screen, and for, once they get about a week to 2 weeks old, I switch it to fiberglass window screen.
So you're filtering out the food all the time?
I'm sorry?
You're filtering out the food all the time, man?
Yes, but during feeding time, the water is coming in at trickle. And when I say trickle, it's probably a little bit more than a trickle, but it's coming in very slow for that big of a tank. And that's why I have the airlift in there to circulate the water to keep it, moving. And then in the evenings, depending upon the size of the fry, we'll increase the flow.
So you let the food density go down real low between feedings?
I'm sorry?
You said when you feed, so you don't keep food in there all the time? So you-
During daylight hours, we try to. And anytime the lights are on, we want food in there. With most, except for the pelagic period, for the first 2 weeks of some species, we usually run about a 14-hour light period.
And you don't keep Phyto in there to keep the food nutritious, to keep feeding it?
Well, we end up adding food several times a day.
No Phyto for the food while it's in.
Oh, in our tank, no. We enrich and then we feed. There are people who do the green water technique with raising fry, but it's not a continuous thing. It's usually just to get them to the point where they're on Artemia.
You keep the density in there all day, and then at night you ramp it up, and it's empty in the morning, pretty much.
Well, during the daylight hours, we keep the density up, and then in the evening hours, we're trying to simply remove it as much as we can.
I have 2 questions. About what size are you finding that they can take the Hecarias in first frozen food?
I've never actually measured them. It's about, usually for most of our species, it's right around somewhere between 4 to 6, sometimes 7 weeks. Most commonly around 6 weeks. And I would say that puts them at about 1.5 inches. It's amazing to watch them because they can eat a bigger size food item than you think they can. Sometimes, people look, so there's no way they can eat that, and yeah, they can.
And then also, you mentioned 24/7 lights. How long do you do that? Do you do a
Just during the pelagic phase. Once they start hitching, then we'll turn the lights off at night.
Do you do a food drip continuously while you have that light on? Or?
No.
No. Okay.
No. If you saw, well, this one isn't so good, but the density is thicker than what you see on the screen. Because then what I do is just once a day I collect Zooplankton and I just load the dickens out of the tank and let it go at it.
So they're not fussy eaters?
Now, if they're hungry and it wiggles and it's the right size food item,
They're out, okay.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you share the name of the vendors that you use for Artemia cysts and also your adult brine?
Adult brine I get is sold at the wholesale level from Gulfstream down in the Miami area. And the cyst, there's a couple places, multiple places you can get them. I get them from the Florida Co-op. You can also get them from Bright Shrimp Direct, Artemia International. Pricing is going to be pretty much the same almost no matter where you go. I don't know how they make money out of it. I don't think there's a lot of markup on it.
And I had a comment. When you're using industrial peroxide,
Yep.
you gotta be careful because some of the product out there has been stabilized with tin. And
Sorry?
it's stabilized with heavy metals,
Uh-huh.
and you don't want to use that either for human consumption or for aquariums. And it's not always evident on the label if it has tin added to it or not.
Yeah, supposedly what I'm using has no additives, and in fact, I noticed that it will, if I get too much, if I don't keep it refrigerated, it will start losing strength.
So that it does break down, yeah.
Yeah. Now, some of them, what I've seen some hobbyists do is they'll go to the beauty shop and they'll get clear developer, and what they use in clear developer is phosphoric acid to lower the pH to stabilize it. And 40 volume clear developer is the same thing as 12% peroxide.
You said you found something else to clean the glassware with and wasn't scratching it, what are you using now?
We were using the green 3M scrub pads because they, get in and clean. They would go in there, they would get all the gunk off the stuff. If you go in and rub your hands on the inside of a hatching vessel, you can feel the slime coat. And so we used that for the longest time. And when I realized what the problem was, I went and got the blue 3M scrub pads, which they say no scratch on them. And they seem to do pretty well. Even our plastic stuff is not getting scratched up. And ultimately, sooner or later, I end up replacing things. But I'm getting several years now out of them before having to discard them. But I was shocked with the glass. Those glass jars, they were really scratched up bad from using the green scrub pads.
How long can seahorses live? Is that different between species of?
It's going to be different between species, and the correct answer we don't know. The longest that I've seen, I've had a pair of red eye that when I got them, first of all, they came into captivity as adults. The person that had them before me had them for 5 years. I had them for 5 years, and then I donated them to a restaurant that had this huge tank, and basically retired them and sent them off. I've had a customer that's had one of our erectus for 11 years. It's not uncommon to see people in the hobby today have seahorses for 5 to 7 years. It used to be, everybody used to say 1 to 2 years is all they live, but we really don't know the correct answer. Anybody else?
Makes me ask a funny question. Is a seahorse year the same as a human year?
I'm sorry, one more time.
I said it makes me ask a funny question. Is a seahorse year the same as a human year?
Yes. Well, for my measurement purposes, yes.
Would you consider maybe staining some of the otoliths in-house and then sending them to a lab to have analyzed later, where you could actually look at the growth? Otolith, ear stones, in the fish, in the head?
Well, first Dan's got a biting microscope, and then maybe we'll do that.
Yeah, that's one.
Send me some of your old seahorses, then go from there.
Yeah, we are getting ready to get set up where we can do more in-house lab testing. But it's expensive for me to send stuff off. I'm not close to where it can be done. And, the other problem is that where I send stuff off too, they like to have some live samples of some fish that don't appear to be affected, then they want the sick fish, and then they want the water sample, and it's just such a pain that we found that over time we see first of all we prevent a lot of problems from happening from experience, but secondly when we do see something we're very aggressive in terms of dealing with it, and it goes away. So I haven't had the need where I've had an ongoing issue. If I had something that I could not get rid of, then yeah, I'd be looking to have it sent off and be tested to figure out what I got to do to fix it. But so far, we haven't run into that.
Have you ever used the Seahorse system for the Artemia, like the magnetized cyst?
I have not. I found that quite interesting, but I have not. Since we've gone through the process that we go through, we're essentially, we're no longer decapping. We used to decap. We just go with the cysts as they are. We put the probiotics in, then post-hatch we do the peroxide treatment, and then we do the enriching with the probiotics. And we have such high survival rates that I haven't wanted to spend the extra money to go after them.
We use the magnetic cyst, and we like it a lot. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer about it.
Cool. I've never had any experience with it, nor have I talked to anyone who's used it before.
Do you read your own ISIS?
Yes. We're basically co-culturing them with the we have one system set up that we pull from.
Are there any things online that watch you process?
Watch us do
Anything online that you process?
grazing
Mices.
mices. I don't know if there's any videos out there. You know, there's some MBL Aquaculture had an article out on how to set up a mycid, what they call the mycid generator, where they set it up where you had adults and then you had some screening material, and the overall would take the nuclei and you would collect it in a collecting cup and then move them to their own tank. We don't do it that way. We're using big round tanks, and we find that if we feed the dickens out of them, the population grows and we just pull them.
You don't have to worry about that cannibalism?
No. No, if you're using a smaller tank, that can happen, but in a round tank, it's interesting. Like, for example, the first time I tried this was Australia, the dual seahorses. One of my friends, Frank Gangi, bred mice for a living. He said, I think these would do well with dwarfs. I said, okay, well, let me try it. Send me some. So we did, and the population just blew up in the tank, and they weren't eating the dwarf fry. But that, again, there was enough Artemia in there that they didn't need to. You know, they fed well enough that we don't seem to have the cannibalism issue.
So what size circular tanks are you using? What's
Our
the-
tanks they run from 34 inches to 42 inches in diameter.
And do you have it on a recirculatory system with a biofilter?
Yes, the sump that I showed you was a glass tank above that one, but the same design is used, basic design is used on all of our systems. And each fry tank is a separate system.
So you keep Artemia in with the mices?
Yes, we feed, that's all we feed on is Artemia, enriched Artemia.
Each of your tubs has a sump with the protein skimmer and all.
Yes, yes. That way, if something goes sideways, we can very quickly bleach it, and the way we're set up, I can take a system down, bring it back up, and be running in less than 24 hours.
And what would be your density for something that has a circumference of 42 inches?
The max density that I've gotten away with is 700 seahorses in one.
No, I mean the mices.
Oh, mices? I don't know. We don't count them that way. We take a net and an eyeball.
Because they're known for being cannibalistic.
I understand, but if you put them in, I've had customers who tried to do the same thing, and they put them in a glass tank, rectangular tank, and they can't keep them. The population drops.
You're just feeding them baby brine?
I'm sorry?
The mice, you're just feeding baby brine?
Yes. I think the round system makes it more difficult for them to catch each other. If you're watching the tank, they do the slow circle around the tank. Where in a square tank, it's easier, you know, for them to get a hold of each other. There's, you get cornered if you will. I've never tried putting shelves in, but some people will actually put some type of shelving in there so they have more surface there. They'll have a tendency to stay on the bottom surface. But if we easily grow enough mices doing it that way that, you know, every 6 months or so I'll order new mices just to keep the genetic diversity.
Are you starting with wild mice or somebody else is culturing?
I'm sorry?
Are you starting with wild caught mice or something somebody else is culturing?
The wild one. Collected.
It seems to me like we used to have some, we got to some that was culturing and they were pretty easy, and we take wild caught ones and you put them together and they eat each other.
I'm sure that can happen, but I haven't had that issue. We've been doing this now. I wanna
Wild
say-
one, just somebody's catching from their tank or what?
I'm sorry?
Wild one, somebody, I mean, there's probably different kinds of mice.
Well, I'm getting them from Sachs. And, you know, I think he does do some cultures, but he also collects. And, you know, I've been doing mices now with the Seahorses since 2008.
What's your flow rate now? Exchange?
with newborn fry, it's probably it's a 90-gallon tub, and I want to say it's about 1 gallon a minute or so. It's pretty low. I don't know what it turns up to when I turn it up, but when I turn it up, again, depends upon, sometimes I have it cranking when they get bigger, but when they're smaller, sometimes I'll put things in there to keep it from spinning. I'll direct the flow so it doesn't spin so fast.
Do you have to do anything to clean up the wild-caught plankton?
All I do, I do most of it right on the dock. I made my file too big of a selection.
I really picture the cart.
Yeah, I couldn't find a cart, so I had to make one. So when I designed the cart, it underneath down the bottom of the wheel in the center, I actually have a washdown pump from the boat. I used to collect by boat. And when I collected it in the boat, I would pull two plankton nets, and I had a station set up where we would wash down pump and everything. So here, I have a hose that drops off into the water, I have a wash down pump, and then I have different sieves, and what I do is I dump the initial collection in one bucket through a window screen size sieve and pull out any 10-4s or macroalgae, other things that come in the net that I don't want. And then I sort it based on size. And most commonly, I'm looking for everything between 125 to 500 microns. And so I'll sort it, I'll rinse it there. I have the probiotics already in the buckets. And then when I get back to the shop, I then rinse it with our clean salt water, and then I feed.
Is this collection site in the Indian River Lagoon?
Yep. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I went to FIT and worked at ORA and
Okay. I'm going off the T-Dock by the Smithsonian.
okay.
The flow rate there, it'll get up to between 4 to 5 knots. And I figured, I did the math one day. The size ring that I'm using, it works out to, when it's running at, I forgot whether it was 4 or 5, but it's 50 gallons a second going through that ring. And it's a whole lot cheaper than taking the boat out. Plus, I can do that by myself instead of having to have a driver. Anybody else?
You do it at hot top?
I'm sorry?
Is it a hot top?
I'm sorry.
At high tide?
High tide.
High tide. That's a great question. I try to go as much as I can close to high tide. And my preference actually is to go 30 minutes after dark. And what happens is some of the plankton comes up during the daylight hours, some comes up at nighttime. What I find by going just after dark is most of the ctenophores start dropping, and the ctenophores will slime up a net so fast that, it's almost, if I didn't have a washdown pump, when the ctenophores are bad, after the first time you drop the net in, you couldn't use it anymore. They just get so clogged up. But my preference is close to high tide, whether it's incoming or outgoing, and right after dark. And I'm sorry, I'm tone deaf in certain frequencies.
Yeah, I got a southern accent too, so.
Last call.
Thank you, Dan. If everyone can just stand here for a couple more minutes. Food's not ready yet, but if everyone can just wait in here for a couple more minutes. If anyone has looked through their bags and they have a